So I've been fascinated by spanking and punishment and impact play for a long time, like definitely predates puberty for me as an interest. I remember reading about it at age like 7 and feeling very kind of like strange and interested and kind of confused. And I started exploring with partners in my teens, and then in my early 20s, I had a boyfriend who was my spanker and was kind of living out a lot of my fantasies with him. And like I think BDSM porn had been a bit of a lifeline for me because I was born in 1984. So I was 13 in 98, and we had the internet in our house. And I was looking at BDSM porn websites and just browsing the previews at 13, like the very first kink.com sites, like hogtied.com, I think was the first one I found, before they'd launched Sex and Submission or any of the others, and just feeling just this enormous sense of relief that I wasn't the only one, because I'd been feeling so unsure and so worried about this intense interest and kind of thinking like, is there something wrong with me? And this is so weird, like surely no one else is into this stuff. So it was just really validating. And I'd always kind of like wanted to perform. I've always been a kind of enthusiastic but a bit shy, kind of like interest in like theatre and drama. I was in some plays, and it was like that boyfriend Tom who was kind of like, you are definitely pretty enough and you could definitely do it, because I was feeling really unconfident, and he was like, you should write to some places and ask if they'll have you. So I started working as a spanking performer, as a bottom, a spanky, in 2006. I think maybe I did my first photos in 2005, but I did my first video shoot in 2006. And kind of quickly scoped out the land, realized that all of the producers were men, and a lot of them were quite sleazy, and a lot of them were quite pushy. And there was one site in the UK which was run by a couple, and the experiences I had on their sets were like a world apart, like just miles apart from anything else. And it kind of set this standard for like what I should be expecting and the treatment I should be expecting. So it was kind of a mixture of how I came to produce my own content was a bit of a mix of I got offered some opportunities to have my own website by some of the sleazy producers that didn't end up materializing. But in the meantime, I got excited about the idea and started shooting some kind of photos and producing some stuff at home with my partner, and feeling quite eager to do that sort of thing, but didn't end up going ahead with those business partners, thankfully, because that would have been a terrible idea. And I was also just bringing a lot of creative energy to the shoots that I was on. Like I would often show up on for a shoot that had been booked for weeks, and the producers would be like, oh yeah, we haven't really thought about what we're doing, let's do a film about how like you're the model and you're late for the shoot and we're punishing you. And I'm just like, really? Could we not?
Yeah.
Or they'd come up with these like extremely bizarre like religious themes with loads of like really specific language that I just found really distasteful. So I realized that if I actually offered to do the unpaid work of like coming up with scenarios, bringing my own like top to the shoot, so there was someone that I had good chemistry with, then I'd have a better time, they'd have a better product, and they like would just lap it up because they didn't have to do as much work. So like I was enjoying this sort of like creative side of it even when I was just performing. And then I also started to kind of apply a feminist lens to a lot of the stuff that I was doing and a lot of the stuff that I was seeing. Like I was blogging and I was reselling content, and I was just very dissatisfied with a lot of the blogs that I was reading and a lot of the content I was seeing, and just kind of started to notice how little of it was made for like a queer or female audience, and the way that like male performers were treated if they even were present. Noticing that when I was like starring with my boyfriend, he often wouldn't get paid, or like if I was performing on a set where one of the tops was someone else's boyfriend, like he wouldn't get paid. And I was in some dodgy kind of dynamics where basically I would show up to what had been presented to me as a shoot, but when I got there, there's this old guy who's like a session client who wants to spank me because he's seen my videos, and he's either paying the producer to be there or he's there for free. And like the producer at that point is like pimping me out non-consensually to this guy because like I'm there to create a good product, but he's there to get his hands on me, and that was not the deal that I'd signed up for.
Yeah, definitely.
So I was like, someone needs to have like a gender egalitarian site where the men are paid and the women are paid, people of all genders are paid, and where everyone is a professional like actor, and you know everything's consensual and people are treated well, and where you can see people of all genders in all orientations and it's not like segregated. And you've got stuff that appeals to viewers like me. And after like 6 months or something of blogging being like, someone should do this, I was just like, hang on a minute. I think I know who that someone needs to be.
And was it difficult to get the first people, like to hire the first people for your project?
I had quite a lot of contacts and I was doing quite a lot of work with like my friends. So me and my ex, my partner at the time, did a lot of performance together. And we were living for a while with friends who were also in the scene and who were both performing for us and happy to do camera work. So the tricky bit was like in my mid-20s at that point, finding the resources and the time to make it happen. The kind of social network part was quite easy because I had quite a big community of like people I'd met at parties and people I'd met through the blog scene, a lot of whom were happy to show face on camera, and who I kind of got on well with, and a lot of them were kind of my age. And there were also other performers who I'd met on shoots who I had good relationships with. So the tricky bit was trying to like pay my rent in London and raise money to buy camera equipment and pay performers, and then also work for free on the project at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it took 2 years to birth the project, which is actually quite quick in the end. But I think I directed my first shoot for Dreams of Spanking January 2009, and we launched in December 2011.
Yeah, awesome. And so from what I gather, it's not only Dreams of Spanking where you're active, you also have like your own Patreon and like different sources of like kind of creating revenue. So this is your full job, like you're a full-time spanking performer, artist.
Yeah, this is my whole career. For a while I was doing like contracting as a web designer as well, but once I launched Dreams of Spanking I stopped doing that. I kind of got dragged into politics by being kind of at the sharp end of it after Dreams had been up for 4 years in 2015. When the law changed in the UK, and I found myself being targeted by the UK government to take the site down because they objected to the content on there. So I kind of decided that I wasn't going to go quietly and started campaigning against porn censorship and challenging the law around obscenity in the UK. And that was how I ended up launching the Patreon. I was also kind of like stepped forward as a spokesperson for like the BDSM community after being at a film festival for fetish films, where people were talking about the new age verification law that was coming in, which obviously has big implications for freedom of expression for adults, because it's never just as simple as stopping kids from accessing stuff. And someone was like, oh, there's a consultation, public consultation, maybe we should all like respond to it. And there was this kind of like tumbleweed. And I was like, well, you know, maybe I should like put together a guide for how to respond to it and some bullet points, and then send that out to everyone, and then we can all like respond to the consultation, but only one of us is like doing the research, and that kind of will save time and make it more, you know, streamlined. So I ended up starting the Patreon to sort of crowdfund that piece of work, but then it ended up supporting me all the way through the whole next 5 years of campaigning against age verification, which we managed to defeat once and is now coming back in a different piece of legislation. So yeah, I've got the Patreon. I'm writing a book, which is not a source of revenue, but it's kind of like what I'm hoping for the future of my work.
You have to let me know when that's published.
Thank you, I will, but it's about this topic as well. It's about erotic fantasy and kind of coming to terms with ourselves and stepping out of shame and taking responsibility for engaging with sexuality in a conscious and ethical way. But I also do like sex work. I do one-to-one spanking sessions as a top, and sometimes a switch with older clients who I've had good relationships with a long time. And I'm currently doing voice acting for a queer spanking sci-fi novel, which is, I'm going to be narrating the audiobook. So yeah, quite a few different like related pies.
Okay, and so since you've been like active in it and also like politically active in the whole industry, and also like have been facing challenges and probably also like some hostility, I could imagine. What do you think, what were major changes? How would you compare what working in this field was back when you started as to how it is nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, in the mid 2000s, it was kind of, we're still in the golden age of online porn. Like it was unregulated. There was a lot of money in it, and but it was very male dominated. And now I think there's a lot more creativity, a lot more diversity, which is really, really exciting. And a lot more people making stuff. Like, it's no longer kind of big studios with lots of money who are making content. We've now got millions of online sex workers shooting stuff at home and putting it on fan sites, which is just creating this amazing diversity of kind of bodies and gender representation and fetishes and sexualities that is being visible, although it is all with this very DIY kind of and often solo content, not exclusively, but yeah, for the kind of like more high budget films, I would say that more of them are still very heteronormative than are kind of queer or diverse. But I'm kind of really happy with, like, I don't think we're there yet, but I'm really happy with how many more female directors we're seeing, even in mainstream porn. And like the amount of creativity that female performers and influence that female performers, even in mainstream porn, are able to have. To kind of bring their fantasies and their scene partners on set and be able, like, we've got a lot more transparency, I feel, now than we did, like, especially in the wake of Me Too and with everyone being on social media. It's a lot harder for studios to get away with behaving badly, even though there's lots of reasons why it's still hard for people to speak out. I feel like we're at the beginning of a really good conversation about how we can improve consent practices on set. And I'm looking forward to that becoming a lot more mainstream and a lot more universal.
Would you think that these evolutions have also changed the public perception of porn? And if so, how?
I'm not sure the public perception of porn has really been that influenced by those changes. I think the biggest influence on the public perception has been the tube sites becoming the place where most people are accessing porn. And like, it's good and bad, you know, like, I think porn is very normalized and most people are very familiar with it, which is better than it being like a dirty magazine that you have to go into a shop to buy, like we had 20 years ago. But what people are seeing on the tube sites is often posted without the consent of the people who made it, often heavily edited by people who didn't make it, or renamed, or like with copy added which wasn't the original copy or wasn't the original title, which often kind of like brings the quality down and erases quite a lot of the subtlety and subversive aspects of the scene. I think, you know, to make it sound kind of like as extreme and as demeaning as possible. Like, I've seen videos which, you know, were titled stuff about, like, I don't know, just really kind of insulting and violent titles, and then you watch it and it's just two people having a really fun time and they're laughing and she's squirting, and it's like, you would not have known that from the title.
Yeah, right. So in your opinion, is there such thing as ethical porn, or like what would define ethical porn?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to create a binary where like some porn is ethical and some porn is not, right? This is very complex, and I think that porn ethics has to center labor rights of sex workers. So I'm much more interested in what's happening on set and to what extent the consent and autonomy of the erotic workers, like the people whose bodies are being involved in creating the product, like how well they're paid, how the communication is, whether they're under pressure or not, kind of how much freedom they have and how much creative input they have. Like, that's much more interesting to me than kind of like what's depicted, because I think that even the most extreme taboo fetish, or even the most like blowjob and double penetration kind of like male gaze heteronormative fantasy, can be ethically produced if you've got those labour rights in place and if you've got good consent practices on set. And especially if stuff like that is packaged in a container which makes it clear, like, this is a fantasy, this is fiction, maybe gives you a bit more context or a bit more information about the performers and their background and their relationship with each other. What I think we're all trying to like improve is a norm where that stuff is sort of all you can find and it's not contextualized and there's no container. So there's a need for showing more explicit consent and a broader variety of sexual practices and sexual styles on camera as well. But the other stuff, like, there's a place for that too, as long as it's got the transparency and the context, and as long as the reality for the sex work is what it should be.
So when you speak of container, what do you mean by that?
So when I talk about a container, I'm talking about the way that we begin and end something to make it clear that it operates in a distinct bubble, that where the normal rules don't apply. So for example, if we were going to do a magical ritual, we would create a container with like an opening right and a closing right, where it's like we're creating a special bubble and the rules are different here. Or if we were going to do some tantra, or if we were doing a BDSM scene, if we were doing like a consensual non-consent role play, there would be a set of things that we would do, whether it's about the clothes that we're wearing or the language that we're using, or an explicit opening and closing that make it clear, like, we're stepping outside our daily roles and we're stepping into something different. And I think porn needs this too, when we're playing with themes of like non-consent or taboo, or things that could be upsetting for people, or things that are just like people taking on roles that are different from what ideally would be their kind of like mutual respect and equality in the real world.